No, I mean, architecture is political. We gotta add that stuff.
Indeed.
We're tearing down communities to build multifamily, and you have to understand we are creating displacement. You're displacing Black and brown folks, and they don't come back.
Half of this podcast would be dedicated to the history of Tyler House, my journey and my discoveries, and hey, I'm gonna solve this housing problem.
Hey guys, what's up? My name is Melissa Daniels. This is the Architecturalist Political Podcast where Black and brown folks talk about architecture. I hope you enjoyed this podcast and be part of my storytelling. I've known Kevin for over 10 years, or should I say I know of Kevin. I think this is the first time we've ever actually sat down and had a conversation like this. It's one of those oldie but goodie conversations that I felt like I've known him all throughout the 10 plus years. We talked about a lot of things. The difference between interior architecture and interior design. What is interior architecture? Him practicing at OTJ Architects for over 20 years. We also talked about the importance of representation. And fun fact, Kevin mentioned that is 0.97%, less than 1% of African Americans are certified, licensed, registered interior designers. Now, if you Google this, you come up with 2% or 1.5%, and those numbers represent interior designers. Unbeknownst to me, I did not know that the term interior designer is not protected, similar to architect in the field of design, I should say, because you have network architects out there. But I didn't know that. So those numbers, you see them 1.5 or even the 2% of interior designers out there, not all of them are certified or registered or have taken a state board exam. Kevin sits on the Maryland Board of Architects, I should say, as well as NCARB. We talked about my journey, my own personal journey. So it's a very healthy conversation. Part of that, too, was my research regarding Black architects that built DC. If you didn't know, I have this series, so far it's just 2 so far, called Black Architects That Built DC. And I got stuck. The reason why I got stuck is because I was having problems distinguishing what role Black architects played in a building. So what does that mean, Melissa? Prior to that, my reference was the DC Preservation League, as well as this book on African American architects. And so it kind of just stops at a certain point. And I was like, okay, so what's new? What Black architects have we been designing in DC? And the challenge is Black architecture firms are far and few in between. We aren't building buildings. And if we are building buildings, there's like 1, maybe 2 people. Everything else are tagged or connected to a larger architecture firm, or we actually work in a large architecture firm. And so I'm like, how do I know the Blackness in this? Because I guess that's what I was looking for. I was looking for Blackness. I was looking for Blackness in DC. Like, Black architect did that. I'm looking at it. It feels DC. It feels Black. And I'm not getting that right now. I got sad. I got sad out of it because we're mudded now. And I don't want to take away from Kevin's overall conversation, but I needed his help. I really did, because I didn't think about interiors, and he does interiors. So now I'm like, interior architect or as an interior designer, you see? Again, I just got muddied, right? But I'm looking for a licensed architect who did interiors. You have to be a licensed architect who did interiors. That's my parameter with that. But I hit a snag, and now I'm in search of Black architects and see what they did. And I guess that's it, and have these conversations. It kind of is morphing into something else. And I'll get in greater detail as I work out these kinks. But there's a realization on myself and how important it is for Black architects to have their own firm and to actually build these buildings and have a distinctive design to their name. I meant when I said distinctive design, whether it's regional or whatever that distinction is. It's like you look at that building, it's like, oh, okay, they like this style, their signature style, like whatever that is. Or not. You can not have a style, right? But I think that as a designer, you could tell a designer from a period of Louis Vuitton, right? Versus Balenciaga versus Tom Ford versus Chanel. You look at something and you're like, oh, that fashion house did that, or that designer did that. And I want us to have one. It's just overall with this design, the architecture, just in general, that you see nowadays, it's all blurry. You don't know who did what. You can't look at a building like that's a Gensler building. That's a Smith Group. There's no building style. And that could be a good thing and that could be a bad thing. I think it's a bad thing because that's how you build a brand. And, I'm always on the Black aesthetic, right? Like whether it be the Pan-African colors, like something graffiti, I don't know. Like we've moved away from that and I'm kind of missing that. But anyway, Kevin and I did not get into this deep in the conversation in terms of Black architects that build DC, but he did provide some clarity in my parameters and what should I include. And I'm writing all this down, but I'm looking forward to that, as well as the next episode that's coming up after this one. Look out for that. It's been a while since I've gone on here and talked, but I enjoyed the conversation I had with Kevin. I actually listened to this episode like more times than not because I just felt that we covered so much in such a short period of time. And we could have kept going, but we didn't. No, we didn't in terms of recording wise because we had a pre-conversation and then a conversation prior to me hitting record and then and another conversation after I stopped recording. So we talked a lot, but you only got a little snippet of what we talked about, but it's a good snippet. So here you go. Hi, Kevin.
Hey, Melissa.
How you doing?
I am doing well.
Yeah, you look great.
Thank you. I try.
I know we don't do this in the beginning, but I think it's worth mentioning. Kevin Sneed, Faia, Fiida, NCARB, NOMA, lead AP, BD plus C. You are a senior principal and senior director of architecture for the architect design firm OTJ Architects, which has offices in Washington, D.C., New York, San Francisco, Miami, Boston, and Dallas. Now, normally I don't read people's bios in front of them, right? I normally don't do that at all. But I think this is a testament of your career.
Thank you. I'm actually blushing. I'm blushing.
It's like the FAIA and then the FIIDA, not to mention the NCARBs and the NOMAs and the leads, APs. But for you to be at OTJ Architects, I'm in awe of that.
You can say that. Yeah.
You don't come across that very often.
Yeah, 20 years is a long time in one firm. They say that an architect actually goes between 3 to 4 firms in their career. And this was the 5th one, so that's not too bad. There's something about OTJ which I really liked, and we'll talk about that a little further, but it's a firm that actually deals with more into interior architecture versus the base building architecture side of the industry.
How did we meet?
Well, we met through a friend. Her name is Annette Carter. Unfortunately, she has retired.
Fortunately. Unfortunately for OTJ, but fortunately for her.
Yes. She and I know each other for a long time, actually probably 15 years of that 20. And she is residing in outside of Atlanta, Georgia, living large. I miss her. I really do.
At the time, I was on a DC NOMA board, and Annette attended one of the meetings and she offered OTJ space, which you guys were in the alley at the time.
Yeah, Ellie.
The alley, right? And through her, I met you. And we've been LinkedIn buddies
Yes.
ever since.
And now I'm just saying that I also listen to your podcast. So as if I really know you now. So
Yeah, you are a supporter of the podcast. And I remember when I saw your email, I was like, oh, Kevin. Oh. And so I got a question. Like, how did you come across this podcast?
I was looking through podcasts actually through Apple or something, and I typed in the word, what's your topic? And I typed in architecture. And your name popped up amongst all the others. But I wanted to see a little bit of a young perspective because, everybody talks about architecture on on a senior level. But I like your podcast because it's talks more of a basis of a person that's an up and coming or actually is there and that's a little bit younger than me, of course, but I always find interest in that versus people who just tell you about architecture. You elaborate a little bit more than that, and that's what I like about it.
We also have a connection through Barbara Laurie. And I feel like we probably met before. I definitely probably met your wife before. I can't remember at all, but I'm definitely sure I probably have caught eyes on her and probably waved to her at some point in my life.
Yeah. Barbara, actually, she and I know each other through my wife. Yes. Barbara Laurie, Shauna Stallworth, and those three actually went to school together. And since I met my wife, I of course met Barbara Laurie, and then she and I started competing in competitions for jobs in the Washington, D.C. area. And it's always fun to see her. To me, she's always playful with me. She, my wife, and Shauna are Howard grads, and she always make the point of telling me that I'm not a Howard grad, but I consider myself an adopted Howard grad because my wife is from Howard, but I think it could work that way. I think it's okay.
So you're not a DC or a DMV. You didn't grow up in the area. How did you get here?
Well, initially, I'm from Texas. I'm from Dallas, Texas. Yes, I am also a Dallas Cowboy fan. So I actually have cowboy boots and a Stetson, just in case people are curious. And once I graduated from UTA, University of Texas Arlington, there was no opportunity for the field of architecture in Dallas at that time. It was back in the late 80s. So what happened is that I was at the time working at Neiman Marcus, and people were telling me as I was working there, you have this class ring on that shows that you're an architect or at least graduated from a school of architecture. And I said, there's no jobs here. That's why I'm working at this store. And they said, well, why don't you go to the area where there's a need for architects? And I never thought about that because Texas is so big. I was like, well, why should I leave the state where I was born and raised from? But I had a cousin that was here in Arlington, Virginia, and he and his parents actually paid for me to come to the Washington, D.C. area, and I have been here ever since. It's funny because my mom still wants me to come back after 30 years of being here, even though I have a wife and son, but I guess I can come back then.
Mom always wants you to come home.
Oh, yeah.
So one of the things you emphasized earlier, interior architecture. That's something that OTJ focuses on. And I heard of it before. And what's the difference between that and interior design?
I think that's probably one of the most popular questions that a lot of people ask me as far as the difference. I guess interior architecture, so basically to me, it's the architecture of the interiors. It has more of a detailing with the structure, the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, as well as the other aspects that creates an interior designer as even an interior decorator. But interior architecture to me is I think one of the most intensive levels. You still have that outreach with your clients. You still deal with your consultants, like I said before, the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing engineers, as well as IT. But having that bit of information, having the knowledge of code, zoning, as well as applications that deals with the Washington, D.C. area, about what does D.C. deals with and everything else, I consider that as an interior architect versus an interior designer. Now, I must say that there are interior designers that know more than interior architects or architects, and there are some architects that doesn't know much of interior design. I think we talked about earlier about Howard University for a career fair. and they were surprised that they didn't hear the term interior architecture. So I had to explain myself every time, like this is an opportunity that you can actually go for. And actually, we do have one or two graduates from Howard that actually love the field of interior architecture and actually made that as part of their career. I so happened to stumble into it. I was a base building guy, and one recession, I actually, the actual base building side was drying up, but for some reason, the interior architecture side was actually plentiful for jobs and stuff. And so they needed someone of my background of helping them through the building code, helping them through zoning, making sure that this school is actually in the right location in regards to zoning and making sure that we're complying with the code and making sure we go through the process and answering the questions that come from the permit reviewer and relating to providing a operable partition and structure, all that in relationship helped me actually love the profession. Matter of fact, I call it an instant gratification. I like to deal with all the same players, but yet get it done within a year or two versus 4 or 5 years for a base building side architect.
One of the things that, again, in the beginning, I read all your acronyms, right? First, it was the F. Let's just assume that this happened in order, right? Like first you got the AIA and maybe you got your lead AP. And then you became fellow.
Mm-hmm.
And then you became fellow again.
Mm-hmm.
And on the OTJ's website, it said that you were the first African-American male to be honored in the IIDA College of Fellows. Did you have any idea when you were applying?
The first?
The first?
When I was applying, I wasn't the first Black because there were several others prior to me. But then I was curious about being a Black African-American male, and I went through all of the list of their fellows, and it appeared that I was. That wasn't necessarily my goal. It's just that it's something in which I was surprised to see. There's always first, even in the 21st century. But that was something that was a bit surprising to me. But then once I look at the statistics, as far as how many African Americans are in the field of interior design, it made sense. Currently, there's about 0.97, less than 1% of African Americans that are in the field of interior design. So that means that maybe it's like 1 degree or maybe 2 degree of separation between knowing the person one or the other. I certainly know the ones that are here in DC. It's just interesting. Well, especially even for architecture, since I am a fellow with AIA, and I know at least maybe every other person, maybe 2 degrees of separation. But overall, we all know each other, and that's why we support each other.
What made you go after the IIDA, though?
It's always great to have your peers give you recognition. And with the AIA, I was so active that, again, I wasn't really even thinking about it until someone on a committee with the AIA suggested that I should submit for fellowship. And I did. So as far as IIDA, the same thing. I was looking into, being a little bit more active with the local chapter in DC. And someone said, well, maybe you should even not only be active, but also participate as far as being a fellow of the IIDA, the International Interior Design Association. So I applied and I got in, and I'm honored. And it's just to have those 2 accolades to me is probably one of the highest pinnacle in which I have achieved in my career. Not that my career is over with now, but it's just that having 2 organizations like the AIA and IIDA, and 2 I just actually respect and cherish, they respect me, that deserve to reach this level of being in both their college of fellows. But it also gives me recognition amongst my peers. I call it the 2-in-1, whereas that as much as I try to have the recognition of being an architect or interior architect, you get at least half of that respect from other people. So I say, okay, maybe I can do both. And maybe people see, oh, he is one. So I guess he is an architect and we should listen to him as far as the knowledge of what he has in his mind and as far as what he needs to know.
When you were applying, is the process similar, the same, or completely different applying to the College of the Fellows of each organization?
It's similar. I must admit, the AIA College of Fellows is extremely harder than the other, but it has the same recognition as far as recommending a reference person. You need a sponsor, more or less, and needing those reference letters and proving your background. I got the fellowship in AIA back in 2017. And as far as the IDA was actually this year. So there was a serious gap between the two. And it took a while for me to reevaluate that information and actually give it to IDA. What is interesting is that they want you to have a video of you presenting and telling them what's the requirement and the need for you to why you want to be on the College of Fellows for IDA. And I actually like that because then you have something to archive for them to have some then they can go back on and say, well, this is Kevin Sneed, this is other people, Ken Wilson, other people in which are fellows that's in this area, even Kay Sargent. Those two are my references, and I think it's great to have that. And I sort of wish that they had that for AIA College of Fellows. Maybe that'd be something that's new for them to apply. But I just can't see someone. It took me a couple of tries to have a video to present to someone to actually judge me on my qualifications, but it was actually kind of fun, but it was challenging.
So they wanted a copy of a presentation that you did, or you had to like set up a
video
and just say, "Hey, my name is Kevin Seed, and I want to be part of your college."
Yes, they had a video of you answering those questions, and the only thing I could see is just for history's sake, as far as having that information. But yeah, it's a presentation more of them asking you that question, you answering. I think it was like maybe 5 minutes long, or if not longer. I just remember I had to do it several times and talk rather fast.
Oh, because there's a time limit.
Oh yeah, there's a time limit on it, and of course the amount size of the actual interview itself, as far as the amount of bytes to transfer back and forth, whatever, upload, download.
So I'm doing a series called Black Architects That Build DC. And one of the reasons why I approached you is ended up being a conversation that I just want to carry on here, is that I am focusing more on the buildings themselves. And then you mentioned interior architecture. And I thought it was interesting because I'm not including interior spaces. And maybe I should include interior spaces. So how would I do that? I guess, like, unless it's a historical space. Like, I'm thinking about your thoughts, as well as I'm trying to bring back that conversation that we had the other day.
Yes, I was thinking about that as well. It's like, unless it's a firm that's a Black-owned firm, and it's that one person that's the lead on that particular project, then they can talk and elaborate for it. I mean, because when you look at the term architect, it's the person that does not only for the exterior, but also the interior. I mean, architecture is architecture, right? So it was, to me, it's a group of people or a team or a studio that actually consists of that firm that consists of being an architect. I mean, back when I first started with being in the Washington, D.C. area, there were firms like Brown and Bryan, Deveron Purnell, Sutton and Campbell. McKissick and McKissick is still existing, but those are the larger firms. I mean, the firms that don't exist anymore, but the firms that are there now is like Moody Nolan and McKissick. And you can ask those people as far as, what particular architect that you have that I can interview. But nowadays you have firms that are acquired by larger firms like SOM, HOK, HDR, Gensler, and there are designers and architects that are in those. But then it's like, what's the definition of that architect? Was he the designer of the project? Or did he just work on the parking garage or the lobby space or whatever? Architecture is everywhere. So it depends on what exactly you're looking for. Because I consider myself as an architect who does the interiors, right? So at my firm, we design the same thing, but it's only the interiors. It's kind of difficult to say how would you look or find those type of people. But like, I know for a fact, that Michael Marshall of Michael Marshall Design Group, I don't know if you've heard of him, but even other people that now, Paul Penshon, actually, he's actually started with the firm Michael Graves and Associates. It was just acquired. There are people out there. It's just that, to me, it's hard to define what they're known for in that firm. And unless of course, they're a designer for that particular project.
So in your applications, right, how did you say, like, because you have to provide projects, right, that you worked on. And then I want to include you in this list.
Uh-huh.
Is it possible? Like, you are a Black architect.
Yes.
I don't know the parameters to include you. You understand?
Yeah, I think what it is that, like, for example, for me, what do I do at my firm? And basically, I am a part of the firm that actually review the drawings in which some designer and the team has created to make sure that it goes through the permitting stage and make sure it met all the requirements for that particular project. Am I part of that team? Of course. Am I the designer of that particular project? No. But am I part of it to create some of the design? Yes. So if you asked an architect, do you do the interiors as well as the exterior? Of course, they always say yes. But what's specific what they're doing? What is more specifically they're pointing out that they want to do or are doing? It's like having a specialty if you're whether you're a lawyer or a doctor. What is your specialty if you're a lawyer? What is your specialty as far as being a doctor? It's the same goes with architects. Just that I have a love for dealing with doing research and finding out what those issues are and then applying it to my design team. I love to design and give them my opinion because everybody has opinions on design. But overall, I just see myself as part of the team, but more specifically in a section of the design that does the construction documents and go through the construction administration, then go through the final results of once everything is moved in, just to make sure that all that is working together. Again, I think that that's to me is a participation of that particular team or that particular person, because without me, there wouldn't be anyone else to help in that particular area.
Are you the architect of record or anything?
I am, and on some projects, it depends on what you're doing. So if you submit drawings to a particular, let's say DC, and I'm the one that reviewed the project, yes, I've stamped my drawings and say I'm the architect of record. I have reviewed the drawings. And this is all part of that whole one of my responsibilities, as well as being part on the board of architects, just to make sure that we deal with the health, safety, and welfare. But in that regard, I'm saying that the project in which I just reviewed is a project in which I approve of. I have been there from the start to finish, so I'm the architect of record. Am I the architect as far as on the design standpoint? I have provided a little bit of it that you can make this move or make this change in order for it to meet code or for it to meet a certain level of approval. And then you could design around that because there's always parameters in which you have to meet. But overall, I am the architect of record for some of the projects at OTJ.
So would you think that it would be wrong of me to go on the basis of whoever stamped those drawings, whoever's the architect of record, to say that this is a Black architect that did this?
Yes, to me, as long as there are parameters that said that I am not only the architect of record, but there are other people that are beside me to create this total design.
So you would feel uncomfortable if I include you in this list of Black architects that built DC?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an architect. I am architect of record for what I do. But that's why I was trying to separate between the design architect and the interior designer or interior architect from my responsibility. I think that's been a long conversation or discussion, even for design awards. When you submit something for design awards, am I the architect of record or am I the design? That's why you just give out the entire design team. But if someone asked me as far as a single person, for me, I would include myself amongst the team. I like to talk to somebody who feels otherwise, and why not?
Because I'm not saying the team, right? Like I'm
Right.
saying that you are who works for OTJ, right?
And works with people.
And with people, but I'm not listing those people. And I'll acknowledge OTJ, but it's you that I'm saying that has participated in the aesthetics of the nation's capital.
I still say yes.
All right. I stopped. Like I had to stop because how do I determine the Black architect? Because the Black architecture firms are dwindling, right? And especially and I'm focusing on Washington, D.C. in this
Mhm.
who built D.C. There are only like a handful, if that, of Black firms in the area. Well, in D.C. I shouldn't say area because I'm not counting Maryland or Virginia. It's hard.
It is hard. I think there has been a transition from a lot of the African Americans starting their own firm versus them joining another firm of a certain level and esteem. Would you want to start your own firm, or would you want to be part of Gensler? Would you want to start your own firm, or would you want to use the resources that Michael Graves can provide you? It depends on how that works for that person. In the AIA, there are about over 70% of the members work for medium to small size firms. And I mean, that's the AIA. So as far as larger firms like the Moody Nolans and the McKissick-McKissicks, and even in Texas, KEI, those are firms that represent African Americans, but they have a diverse staff that's included within that organization, within that firm. And I agree with you. It's like I said, the ones that I even remember back when I first started, I always wanted to work with a Black firm just to get that same feeling as you would if you are in a university from an HBCU versus a PWI, that camaraderie and everything else. But I think in modern times, today times, I think that's lost a little. And to have that recognition of an organization that already has that, or a firm that already has that, helps them out, because then they see this African American male or female, better yet, that actually is part of their firm. They're looking for people to represent, which is good. I would agree. Get the woman that's part of HOK in California, but she is very impressive. That she could start her own firm, but she preferred to actually be part of a firm that represents something else. To even elaborate a little bit more on that, I think more and more people who are, I think in the past 10 years, are not necessarily starting their own company. And if they are, they get acquired by a firm that has that reputation, or everything has been established. I'm not sure if you noticed that, but I certainly have.
Oh yeah, definitely. Especially doing this research, right? Like, when I was doing like Phil Phelan, at what point is it Phil's or is it Perkins and Will? You understand what I mean? And
absolutely.
Should I include Perkins and Will because of Zena Howard, or should I stop with that? Like, I don't know how to discern that. And that's why I was like, well, maybe it's the architect of record I should do, because otherwise it stops. There isn't any.
Right. So that's where you have to look in, like, who is the design architect for the projects in which you're looking for. So that's where, to me, it gets gray. I don't know which direction to go. Of course, I'm an architect, but then it's like, but are you the design architect, or are you the architect of record? Who stamped and signed these drawings? Or who is the main person that oversee the project on the design side? Because a lot of architects see that as, okay, I'm the architect, I'm the, for example, the Frank Lloyd Wright, the Paul Williams person of that particular firm, then that's clear and concise. I think in the field of architecture is still that gray. Even the terminology, like you just mentioned about interior architect and even architect, that only a certain level of people can use that particular title. It's hard to dissect on which is that particular person that you are looking for. And to me, it's going to continue to be that way, or even worse throughout the years.
Yeah. Because now I'm following the person. I'm not following the firm.
Right. I think in this day and time, it should be the person and not necessarily the firm itself. Because again, I'm with OTJ Architects. 70% of our office are actually women. So is that considered as a minority? Yes. But, as far as on an African American, who is the African American architect that's part of that firm? So far, it's me. But they are making a lot of changes in which I actually appreciate. One is a scholarship in which they have sponsored, which is the licensure for architects and interior designers who are African American, because there are over 170 architecture schools of architecture, and out of that's 170 plus, it's 7 that's NAB accredited for HBCU. As far as interior design, none. There are some schools of interior design that are at HBCUs, but there are none of them that I'm aware of are Fiida accredited, which is part of the accreditation board for interior designers. You mentioned, not to go deviate, but you mentioned earlier about the term interior architecture. Right now, there are several schools that are interior design schools, clearly, but they throw in the term interior architect and design. So more or less to entice more people, more men into that field. But the problem is that the accreditation for that is still interior design. So even though you have a degree that says interior architecture, the accreditation is still interior design. So it's kind of not necessarily trying to fool you, but it's still something in which you should be aware of when one applies to become an interior architect or interior designer in this field of architecture and in the industry.
Hmm. I never thought of that. I'm not interior, but I didn't think of what HBCUs would have an accredited program or even the numbers that we represent in interior design just in general.
Yeah, which also hence why there's so much of a small number of interior designers in the field is because of that. A lot of schools of architecture are now acquiring part of the interior design, so you can call it interior architecture, if you will. As far as HBCUs, it still is a separation between the two. I mean, they look at interior design as being a home ec versus a natural profession, of interior design. And if it is interior design, they're probably looking at more of interior decorating than what we call nowadays as interior architecture. It has a ring to it, and it does entice people to become a part of that particular field. But when I have a person that comes to my office and they say that they're an interior architect, I say, well, you can't use that term unless you are a registered architect in a state. It's a legal and binding term. Talk about politics. This gets really, really hairy because I have people come up to me and say, hey, I am an interior architect. I say, oh, okay, then you must either have a degree in both architecture and interior design, and you're licensed maybe in interior design or in architecture. That term, that title actually is changing and it's evolving throughout the past even 10 years. I'm amazed at how many people actually use the term interior architect in the schools now. And NCARB even tried at one point to cease and desist using that term, but the schools themselves are a separate entity from the public. So you can't change that. However, once they graduate and they go outside to the public, then the NCARB and the other state boards have the authority to say cease and desist using that term architect or architecture. That's where it comes into play.
Wow. And even you can't call yourself an interior designer either, correct?
Well, okay. So
Uh-oh.
you can call yourself an interior designer because interior design is not a legal and binding term, unlike architect. But you cannot call yourself a certified interior designer. There are some states that have CID, LID, licensed interior designer, RID, registered interior designer, licensed interior designer, and certified interior designer, those three. But calling yourself interior designer is not a legal and binding term as of yet. Organizations like IDA, ASID, gives you that authority to say, wait a minute, are you really? But overall, it is not a legal term that you can have a board to tell you to cease and desist using that title.
So I can call myself an interior designer if I wanted to.
You can call yourself a designer. You can call yourself an interior designer. You can call yourself, but you cannot call yourself an interior architect.
Because of the word architect is protected.
That is correct. The term architect is protected. I mean, going far back as the 1800s when NCARB was created, or 1900s, sorry. But I would love to have a school like Howard that has interior design, or even Morgan State. Morgan State actually is starting an interior design program, and they're right now in the process of getting their CETA accreditation. To my knowledge, it will be the first HBCU to have a interior design program that's been certified.
So since we're going down on this licensure path, I want to acknowledge that you serve on both NCARB and the Maryland State Board. Is the Maryland State Board of Architects? Like, what's the
acronym? It's the Maryland Board of Architects.
Okay.
A little bit of history of that. When in Alexandria, I used to be on the Board of Architects Review Board, where I reviewed all the designs of houses that's being built in the Parker Gray District of Alexandria. Because my grandmother always taught me to give back to the community, and she's still in my head. And so if you get this degree, you get this licensure, give it back. And I said, okay, I'll do something to the community. And that's something that relates to architecture, which is being on a architectural review board. When I got married, we moved to Maryland, my wife and I, and then I realized that they don't have review boards in the area which I'm in. So I wanted to be part of the state. And at that time, there was an opening for being on the board of Maryland. So there's a Maryland Board of Interior Designers, and I was one of the board members there for 2 or 3 years. But once there was an opening for the Board of Architects, that's when I jumped onto that board as well. And I gave that my position of the interior designers to my wife, who happens to be an interior designer. So she took my position there, and I acquired my position on the board of architects. I've been there for, I think, going on 6 years. But it's great to actually review, because part of the responsibility of the Maryland Board of Architects is to facilitate the licensure of accreditation for your health, safety, and welfare. But we also, review people who are going to be taking the examination. We also review people who are getting reciprocity. And we also have a smaller committee that actually review people who actually break the bylaws and which are part of the State Board of Maryland, which is, I don't consider the fun part, but it's a very interesting part. The complaints committee, people complain that, this person is calling themselves an architect. This person has been practicing architecture for 5 years and he's not even a registered architect. Those are the things in which I consider as interesting. Back when I was with NCARB, I was on the professional code of conduct, and that was fun too, as far as reviewing people and what they're doing as far as calling themselves an architect. I mean, it took me a long time to reach this level of my career, and then for someone else to, it's just as easily just steal someone's license number and then say that I'm an architect, just not right. One thing in which I always being asked is that when people ask me what's the difference between an interior architect and an architect, the thing is that everyone, as far as the community, the society knows what an architect does. They know that, but no one really knows what an interior designer or interior decorator. So when you add those two together, interior architect, they understand more. And I think that's the issue is that how will society understand what an architect and what an interior architect does versus what a interior designer, interior decorator does? And I think that's where the problem is, or where it lies, is that a lot of people just don't understand everyone's responsibility in this field, in this industry, this design industry. And I think the best way to do that is to use terminologies like interior architect. But as being on the Maryland Board of Architects, as including NCARB, we have to uphold what is in the rules, the bylaws for that state to say that the term architect is a legal and binding term, and that's where it comes to play. You can't use it. That's why I really wanted to say and actually convey that to your audience. It is a legal and binding term, and everyone has to understand it.
And I think that outside of our profession,
Mm-hmm.
you have influencers who are deemed as interior designers, interior decorators, or whatever. And the value of the profession, I feel like, is being reduced, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because,
Mm-hmm.
and not to bash or any influencers. Like some of the stuff, I'm just like, oh my goodness, this is great. This is beautiful. But then they do this as a business, and then they take on clients, not knowing, for example, like you mentioned earlier, like zoning, for example, how important it is. Okay, they want a restaurant, but this building isn't deemed as a restaurant, is deemed as a doctor's
Zoned for.
office. Or,
Mm-hmm.
you
Yes,
understand what I mean?
exactly.
So I think that even if NCARB can allow someone who has sit for the NCIDQ and has passed that exam to maybe translate that over so that they can say that they're an interior architect by taking one or two extra exams to call them that title.
Well, I think it's that title is hard to.
Because it's state based. I forgot.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. State based.
yeah. I remember there was a discussion with NCARB about a School of Interior Architecture and Design that a student graduated, and he told his parents that he was an interior architect and that he can take the ARE examination, which he can in 13 states, that you can do that and then do double the EXP and become an architect that direction. But his parents, who paid for his schooling, thought that he was an architect. And that's when NCARB realized that we cannot touch the schools, especially a privatized school, that says that we can do what we want to because we're within our boundaries, we are within our lane to call us a school of interior architecture and design, which is unfortunate because it's confusing the masses right now. Society
Very
is
confusing. Very confusing. Like just using that word, unless they have network architect in front of it.
Yeah.
That's it. But it's still I think people will start playing with the word.
We'll start.
Well,
It has already happened.
it's
The
already
schools,
happening.
their GW has changed to interior architecture and design, Marymount interior architecture and design. I think, and it's going to grow. There's going to be more schools to try to have ownership of that name and say, we did it first, and then try to adjust their curriculum to make it more of an educational. But right now, there is no curriculum that is approved for accreditation for interior architecture. Interior design, absolutely. There's also an examination, of course. But as far as in academia, I think that's where it's happening, where is that we're trying to as fast as possible create ownership of that title in order to create the academia, create the education experience, and then the examination. Again, that three-legged stool. And I think that process is happening slowly but surely. Can NCARB get in front of that? Again, if they can create an examination called ARE Light or Interior Architect, they can do that. And then in the ACS, the NAB accreditation, have it for interior architecture, they can do that. I think, matter of fact, I think they should do that.
Yeah, I think, and then the states can follow suit,
We'll follow
right?
suit.
Yeah,
Follow suit.
yeah.
Yes.
Because at first I thought that we can be the leader. We can just
Yeah.
just let them know, like, hey, we have this new accredited licensure. You should hop on board and make sure your state is
on board on this.
on board on it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I know there's been conversations, but I'm not sure how far. But right now, the name is definitely being used. And on people's degrees, I saw this one young lady's degree. Clearly, it says interior architecture, but the accreditation of that is interior design or arts and crafts. That's where you have to be careful of getting a degree. For example, when I first started in the field of architecture, I didn't know there was a difference between a BS versus a B Arch versus a B Bachelor of Arts degree in architecture. I didn't know. I didn't know which one to go to. Just that I know there was a school in Texas that I went to, which is University of Texas in Arlington, that is to this day is a NAB accredited university if you get your master's. Did I know that I had to get a master's in order to take the examination? No. I knew there was something going on, but I knew that that there were a master's and a bachelor's, and I just want to get my bachelor's and get out and start in the field. The things I know now, which I knew then, I wish there was someone like the board of architects go to my university and say, hey, you can do this, but here's other multiple pathways that you can go through if you don't get your master's that's NAB accredited.
Mm-hmm.
I just didn't know. Did you know? I didn't.
Oh, well, I did know. But I was that person in high school that like had my whole career path made, and I knew what I did the terminologies. And again, I interned at Delaware and Purnell. So, and I had Barbara with me. So Barbara really
yeah, she told you
on all these things. And when I say she laid the path for me, she literally laid that path for me. And when I didn't, the path that she laid, I felt like I wasn't successful. She tapped me on the head. It's like, it's okay. It's still there. The path is still there. This road may be windy and you may be walking instead of flying there, but you're on that road. So yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that road may have some cobblestones on it.
Cobble had a ditch. It was like this long 50,000 foot gap. I had to build a bridge. Like
it's difficult. It's difficult.
Yeah. In terms of this is again what we previously talked about. One thing I do love about Maryland is that you can become a licensed architect just based off of experience.
Oh, absolutely. If you have 10 years experience, you can take the ARE examination, even with a high school degree. If you've been with an architect for 10 years, then you can become an architect. And that goes in with even other multiple pathways to becoming an architect. That's one of the missions in which NCARB is actually pushing, is that, there are things that happen in your career that have you to stop midpoint in your education or in your experience. What the Board of Architects in the state of Maryland, we actually know that and we see that and try to give you options. Like if, for example, if you have only 10 years experience and 2 years of education at university, you can get that adjusted to actually give you an opportunity to take the ARE examination. I must say that I have seen an uptick, people with interior design degrees taking the ARE examination, which is interesting. And I commend them for doing that. But there's been few and far between. I've seen maybe one or two every year of someone with just the experience. The number has actually been dropping on that side, people with just the experience. Mostly it's people who have like an associate degree in architecture in the state of Maryland. There are two schools that you can get an associate degree. One is Montgomery College, you can get an associate degree, and the other is Anne Arundel County in Maryland that you can get an associate degree in architecture as well as an interior designer. And then they want to know what's the next step if they couldn't go into University of Maryland, continue their education to become an architect. They still can do that with certain years of experience, background that they can take the ARE examination.
How do you feel about that? Like, I'm for it, like I mentioned it before, but I'm just sitting here thinking, I think you mentioned previously that there's only like 13 other states that have this experience.
Yes, they'll allow you to take the examination. Yes, 13 states. I believe New York is one of them. Illinois, I think it's actually changing to where they require to have a professional degree. But DC and Virginia requires you to have that professional degree and not a pre-professional degree to take the examination. Just remember, there are 55 states and territories, including DC, in which you can take the ARE examination. And out of that, there are 13 that if you just have a high school education or have a certain level of education and experience, the state of Maryland will give you that opportunity to take the exam. Now, the exam is the same throughout all states. And that's the whole point of NCARB, which is the National Certification Architectural Review Boards with an S. A lot of people don't realize that it's boards, which is a culmination of all the 55 boards together. We all take the same test. We just that we try to look at their education and their experience before they take the examination, or the three-legged stool they call it back in the day, or still call it that.
I received an email from NCARB the other day, and they're doing like a competency standard. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm glad you said that. I knew I had to talk about it. So the State Board of Maryland, Board of Architects, we saw that there is a disparity between African Americans, as I mentioned earlier, there's less than 2% are actually architects and less than 6% is actually taking the examination. And what we decided to do is go to the two schools of architecture in the state of Maryland and actually have a symposium, a presentation on everything of which I just told you now is like, what schools of architecture are there in the state of Maryland? There's only two, Morgan State, HBCU, and University of Maryland, PWI. That's the only two schools. But then there's those other two schools I mentioned too with associate degrees that you can take it. And what is the process of those multiple paths that you can become a registered architect in the state of Maryland? We also have someone from NCARB to actually elaborate on those different pathways. I'm on that committee to talk about it as well as I trying to hopefully I convey that information correctly. But this year we're going to be at University of Maryland to do the same thing. We did it at Morgan State last year, and so this year we're going to be doing it at University of Maryland, just to have people be aware of those multiple paths. Because a lot of people just Melissa, but I'm sure that a lot of people just don't know it and they just give up on their goal of becoming an architect. I mean, even in my office, I always try my best to push everyone to hit that direction of becoming an architect. I don't want to be the only one. That's why I want to encourage people. I don't want to be that anomaly, if you will. I want to at least see more than just two people that stands out. And like you mentioned earlier, to be that anomaly for the College of Fellows for IDA and AIA. Let it be the norm, that at least that 13% of the US, that are becoming an architect or like to become even an interior architect.
I've been in this process, it's a licensure journey process for a long time, longer than I'd like to say. And there's a lot of things that I've learned throughout this, right? Like, and I've seen the changes that NCARB has done. Some not so great, some I love and applaud, and I thank you for it. And a colleague of mine was like, hey, like, how can I help you in this journey? Like, how can I support you and all that other stuff? And I think part of it, what we don't talk about too, is mental health in this. And it's just the industry. is this how we are in this profession, especially those who are licensed, look at their own journey and was like, well, I did this in a year, or I knew that I had to sacrifice, or whatever method that they use to get them to become licensed. They like to apply that same concept to you. And that is not healthy. And I just wish that there was a narrative. It's a journey, it's not a sprint, and it's a marathon. And
Mhm.
sometimes the marathon may take 26.3 years to complete versus, the 3 hours
Mhm.
that it'll take for you to actually complete the marathon.
Yeah.
So, some grace, especially for us people. I want to say people of color, but it's really all people at this point, that it's okay
Mhm.
to take one exam every 3 years. As long as you take it the next time, I think that's the important thing.
Mhm.
And just to show grace. And that's something that I feel like NCARB can't do. It's not their position to do.
Mhm.
But stuff like the rolling back clock thing and just eliminating that was huge. And it doesn't, I wish people understand that just because there's a deadline doesn't mean that it works per se. Like just to say that, oh no, like I need to hurry up to take this to complete it. Now, people do work. I mean, we are all in this profession, but we like to do things and work all night to get this deadline done, right? But it's not a design thing. It's not a creative process. It's a test taking method that you have to do.
Yeah, it's funny. When I first started taking the exam, yeah, I believe it was 9 parts with a 12-hour or 8 to 12-hour vignette at the end. And I was at Howard University at the Blackburn Center with a field of other architects doing the same thing. And that's intimidating right there. And I'm sorry to say that I did not pass the first time around. And at that time, you're going to take the exam once, that's in June. And then you can take the exam again, I think in December, but it's just the design portion. I think NCARB has come a long way since those days of going from a 9 division with a marathon 12-hour vignette. I still remember it. I still have cold chills every time I'm thinking about it.
PTSD.
To a point to where now it's 6 divisions and it relates to your AXP. It's now 6 divisions. And as far as you mentioned, as far as if you have, whether it's a language barrier, whether it's a person who have ADHD and a person, they'll give you extra time, extra hours to take that, but you have to present that first to NCARB in order for them to give you those extra hours. Even for examinations, NCARB now provides you with exam tests to prepare you for that. And I must give credit to both Amber Book as well as Black Spectacles. They give you a discount as well as maybe some opportunities for you to take their online study material. My office, actually, as part of an incentive, we give you access to both as well as the PPI material. If you're from old school like me to do the pages, but most of the young kids, they actually love the online study material. And as part of that scholarship I mentioned earlier from my office, we offer that to architects and interior designers. The equivalent to that is the Q Practice study material online for interior designers, because I want that number to go up. I like to see a lot more African American women in the field of interior design, interior architecture, to see that portion grow as well.
Another thing that we talked about too, going back to Maryland State Board.
Oh, fun. I love talking about, I mean, as far as all the extracurricular activity I've done through AIA. So when I arrived here in DC area, I want to be an architect. I had a pre-professional degree, just want people to be aware of that. And that was a long journey in itself. At that time, Virginia, but not DC, required you to have a 5-year professional degree. So I asked my boss, can they pay for my AIA? And he says, yes, but you have to be active. If you're not going to be active, then I'm not going to pay for your membership. And I really appreciate that, because the AIA was the one that gave me the skills that I have today to have that level of leadership, a level of collaboration with other people, having that opportunity to know other people in other firms. AI did that. It destroyed my relationship of finding a girlfriend, but to the point of some people say that the AIA was my girlfriend. But overall, I think I really respected the being part of that organization of the American School of Architects, and it did help me. We had study groups, and we studied along with each other and actually help each other out. I've seen less and less of that throughout my years of observing, being on the board. There's not those study groups like there used to be, like when I was taking the examination. There's more people that's more of a silo than anything else that I have ever seen right now. I'm not sure if it was because of COVID or you just cannot find that group, but the AI still provides that and it still exists. It's just that not as big as it used to be.
I think that's another amazing thing about you, though, is that you had to, like, with the whole not having that accredited degree and seeking out a way to get that license, and I see that throughout your entire career. You seek out information, you seek out knowledge, you seek out volunteer opportunities, right? How do you serve? Because your nana put that in your head,
Yeah,
and you still carry that to this day.
yeah. Hopefully it goes towards my son. You always have to give back.
And if not, then people like me or people who hear this. So who was your mentor? Who do you credit?
The number one, I would say my mentor is probably my grandmother. She was one of the first graduates of, she went to Prairie View A&M. She knew people when she was teaching education at the high schools back when Dallas was predominantly was segregated. And then she was also a member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority. Oh my God. I didn't know what an Alpha Kappa Alpha was when I was a junior high school and high school, but I knew that I must like them. But she used that resource because I had issues with as far as English, math, and everything, and she just reached out to them, and they were my tutors. She knew an architect that graduated from the high schools in Dallas and went to University of Texas, and I worked for him, but that was thanks to my grandmother. And then she was the one that actually pushed me through it, the whole gambit. She used to tell me that if you take the exam, it's only one. No one would know, but as long as you pass. But when you become an architect, who would know? Who would care? As long as you can call yourself an architect. I took word to that. I really appreciate that. Then once I arrived here in the Washington, D.C. area, my wife, of course, she knew, I consider Barbara Loria as a mentor or as a friend, a close friend I can really reach out to. She knew also Mort Marshall, and he was a great architect as well as a good mentor. He was a double fellow. He was a fellow for AIA as well as a fellow for CSI, the Construction Specification Institute.
Didn't know that.
Oh, yeah. And he was telling me, he said, if you have the opportunity, become a double. I said, okay, I will look into that. And of course, right now,
There you
I
go.
there you
You're
go. Catherine Pregmore. I love Catherine. She's still wondering why I call her Catherine instead of Kathy, but I'm from the South, okay? Until you tell me I can call you Kathy, I'll call her Kathy, okay? Just like Catherine Williams, I'll call you her Kathy too. All those Kathys, Kathy Dixon, I'll call her, well, she's Kathy. I consider somebody, I think everyone should have a mentor, and I call it the three-tier mentorship. Someone who is younger than you, who you see who's up and coming, and they can tell you the things in the software and the programs that they learned from school, or the things in which, or techniques in which they have learned. They're teaching me. So that's a younger mentor. I have someone of my same level of a mentor that can actually teach me the things in which I didn't know and the things that I should know at my age, or around about my age. But then you have the traditional mentor, the ones like the Harry G. Robinsons, that's my mentor, or any other person of that level that's more senior, that you see your destination, you see where you're going, and they can nurture you into that direction that you need to go in order to reach that level in your career. I'm always an advocate for mentorship.
I remember that Barbara told me the same thing because I remember I came back from Boston and I had to leave my school because I couldn't afford it anymore.
Yeah.
And, living there was expensive. There's a bunch of other things that happened. But I had to come back home and I ended up graduating from UDC. So I was here for like 2 years
Mhm.
already. And then I popped in Delaware Ponel and I saw her and stuff. She's like, why didn't you tell me that you were here for this long? Like, and then why did you go to UDC? You could have went to Howard. And I was like,
Mhm.
I didn't want you to be my teacher. And then we talked some more and I was just telling her like I was embarrassed. I felt like I failed. And so she was like, you graduated, right? I was like, yeah. It's like, that's all that matters. It doesn't matter how long it took you as long as you did it. And
That's
when
right.
you said that, that prompted me to remember that story. And I carry that because even, licensure, like it doesn't matter as long as I get it, right? Like, and once I get it, then doesn't matter.
And no one would take it away either.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Right. And
Yeah.
that's why I'm still trying. I should have stopped a long time ago. I should have find a different career path. I could have left the industry. And, even though I'm not in a traditional firm right now, that's just what I want. And her voice of saying it doesn't matter as long as you get it. It doesn't matter how long it takes. You could be 82 years old and you could become a licensed architect. It doesn't matter as long as you did.
When I first started on the Maryland Board of Architects, there was a person, I see his application to take the examination, or he took the examination and he still hasn't passed. And he was like 76 years old. But the year that he did pass, the chair and everyone on the board just wrote a letter just congratulating him, for that. Every person's journey is different. I mean, you know that. You have to figure out those ways, get all the information you possibly can to know what pathway is the best way for you and only for you. There are obstacles or things that happen, as far as education, like you mentioned, or even career. I mean, even for my loving wife, she a Howard grad, but she took the NCIEQ exam for interior design in lieu of the ARE examination. And I actually met her when we were taking the ARE examination together. Show how small the world is. But then I saw her years later and we have different paths and she was okay with it. So look at me. And now I'm doing interiors, and she's doing interiors. Maybe we should start our own thing. But that's a different story to talk about. But I really commend her for going that route and realizing that this is not for me, but maybe this direction is for me. And believe it or not, it works. So whether it's becoming, I keep telling everybody, at least to have some type of credentials by your name, because it gives you a preempt to people looking at you and say, oh, this person is a PMP, this person is a CSI, this person is a NCAR. Because that, with me, I just added a little bit more to that. But overall, it just helps prepare people to see that this person actually had made this certification, licensure, registration, and they are this project management organization. They passed that exam. People used to ask me, which should I go first? Should I go for the WELL, the LEED, the ARE, the NCIEQ? I have young kids right now saying, I'm going to take both. I said, you're going to take both the ARE and the NCIEQ? Good for you.
Ambitious. But
Yeah.
people were trained to say that stuff. That's the killer part. We're trained to say, I'm going to get all these alphabets behind my name.
Right.
And then as soon as we hit a first failure, then it's over with. And there are people who actually do that and are successful in that. And
Oh, yeah.
congratulations to you. But there are people who also has a large appetite for all these credentials. And the reality is the reality, like it's time consuming. It's a lot of money because it's not cheap at all. And when you hit that first failure, it's soul crushing.
Yeah, again, like when I first took the ARE examination, I mean, 9 divisions, or maybe it was 10, but I passed only one. I was devastated. And I thought I studied. The second time was a lot better. It was a lot better. And the third time was the time when I passed. But people should not be ashamed, like I said before, of telling everyone, but I passed. Did anybody ask me about my journey of how many times I took it? No. They know that I'm an architect. But people like you, Melissa, and I wish I can go through the internet and give you a hug, but I think there's always someone that can help you out and to tell you which of these journeys that you can take and maybe it's a way of, okay, if I don't do the ARE, maybe I can take the becoming a professional management professional, a practice management professional, and take that examination. Maybe I can pass that. Do those baby steps to reach that pinnacle of becoming an architect. And that's what I did. Actually, once I passed the ARE examination, I said, okay, the next step for me is to have something that's unique, that is not part of any other person who's an architect as well. So I have that one up on somebody. And that was actually CSI. I became a CDT. That's the first tier of the construction specifications to be a construction document technologist. Then all of a sudden, this lead came up, and I said, oh, that's a fad. I'm not even going to do that. I'm not even going to think about it. Well, it wasn't a fad. And
It was not a fad.
it's not a fad. What was I wrong on that one is actually something in which indeed we all need to be aware of, and they are teaching in school, and that's something in which someone could apply for as well. And I did that. And then those two are the major ones in which I applied for and took an examination after taking the ARE. I was even thinking about taking the NCIAQ exam, but I was like, well, I think I'm done. I think I have enough experience, enough education, and enough knowledge to convey anything to anyone that they need to be aware of what they can take. I always like to give people these different varieties of journeys in which they can move towards. There's other things other than the ARE examination, but if that's your goal, stick with it. But maybe have a little hopping point to where you're going from one stone to the next stone and going up, up, and up. Just don't be discouraged on just having one, and then not doing it at all. Just have those people that's beside you, not behind you, but beside you, to help you, nudge you to make sure you reach that goal in which you want to achieve.
You know you're my mentor, right?
Uh, okay, thank you. I love to. Absolutely. I wish I've known you and actually talked to you even so funny. We talked about this. The thing about these podcasts is that I know you. You don't know me as much as I know you because you put yourself out there. And a lot of people can see you, and I saw you at an AIA conference, and there was a group of kids around you say, I felt that way. I understood that way. So you're helping people. And I just look at you afar and say, oh, okay, there she is. I'll see her and I'll talk to her. And once I turned around, you were gone. So, but I think you're providing a good resource for a lot of kids who are on a certain level in their career. And how can I go to this next step? And you're telling them your journey. I think that's something to be commended.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. It's same thing with you. Same thing with you. It's like, I know you. I know of you mostly, right? I know of you through associations and all that other stuff through other people. But let me tell you, like, talking to you has been a treat these past couple of days. And
So here,
I don't know you as much as you know me. And it's a little weird, right? Like,
I'm not stalking, for the record. I'm not stalking. I just admire.
I'm glad we had this talk, and I'm glad you were able to be on and encourage a lot of people who are listening, and whatever phase in life they are. I hope they got something out of this conversation.
I hope so. I hope so.
On that note, thank you, Kevin, for coming on.
Thank you for having me be on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to Architecture's Political Podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode and found it informative or at least entertaining. If you like what you heard, please share with others. You can also connect with Arcus Poly on social media, currently on Instagram as well as Facebook and Twitter. For more information, visit us on our website. It's arcuspoly.online, ARCHIPOLLY.online. I also want to thank our loyal supporters who have been with this podcast for at least 3 years. It means the world to me, and I'm totally grateful to have you part of this community. I will try to bring you the best content as possible, and I can't wait to share more amazing episodes with you. If this is your first time listening, or just like a particular episode, or all of them, you can support this podcast by going on glow.fm/ArcusPoly. Again, thank you for your support. It means the world to me, and thank you so much for listening.